Little formalities that we have to do, as this is an evening of special meeting of the Board of Education for the purpose of hearing any information from the community, as well as anyone in the district or any concerned party in the Horseheads Central School District. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Brian Lynch, our Vice President of the Board, as he starts off the meeting.
I'd like everybody to please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, standard board meeting procedure. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of
the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to call the meeting to order and turn over to Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin tonight, this is the second of several meetings for our community to come together on the Horseheads 2030 concept. And really, we want to make sure that we're very clear on the Horseheads 2030 concept is that this is about the educational focus of the district moving forward now and into the future, as well as the capital constructions of the district now and moving into the future. So we don't want people to think that it's just about, well, what's happening in the year 2030. It's about the journey and destination, but that starts really in December of moving forward as we go. So tonight, we're going to give you a little update and then open it up to the floor by our architect in regards to what we've been doing currently in the district and leading up to this evening's presentation, and then at the end also go over some of the direction that we will follow moving forward. The board is here seated so that they hear any of your thoughts, questions, or concerns, as well as also update themselves. In addition, there's no action to be taken tonight. If there's any questions, mostly that will be addressed by our architect or the district administration. And with the questions we do have, because we videotape these, we'd ask for your courtesy. Please, I know it's sometimes uncomfortable, but please come down to the mic so that we can catch the audio for the video for those people that are unable to attend tonight. And that way they can clearly understand what your questions or concerns are as we move forward. So I want to thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. As many of you can come out, each of the meetings, it grows and grows and grows. So we appreciate your effort. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chad Snowberg, our lead architect for Hunt Engineering Architect and Survey. I always get that, yeah, that's no problem.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to go through tonight kind of a broad stroke of what we've done to date with certain meetings and some of the information that we've already kind of gathered from different people within the district, as well as give you kind of an overview of what some of the terminology and some of the things that we've done through the process. Not every project, but most projects begin with what in the industry is called a BCS. A BCS is a building condition survey. New York State requires every district, every school district in the state of New York to conduct what's called a BCS, condition survey, on their buildings every 5 years. That's a requirement by New York State. And that process is intended to identify items that are in need of improvements within the building, certain maintenance items that may need improvement, being roofs, be it mechanical, be it electrical, but it's really driven from the idea of what to do to the buildings to be able to continue to maintain them and keep them at a certain quality level. And Hunt was hired to do that. Back in 2015, we performed that BCS and went through the building and identified those things. I think what's really important to identify is what a BCS is not. And what a BCS is not is to identify educational program improvements that can happen within a district. And the way that we gather that information is to have these meetings that we've had over the past couple of months to gather information from administrators, gather information from department chairs, as well as faculty and staff. So that's kind of an overview of what a BCS does for you as a district, as a community, as well as what it doesn't accomplish. And I'm going to go through how we accomplish those other things that a BCS doesn't do. So to kind of stay focused on the BCS, what we did was we walked every building, took lots of photographs of your buildings, all 4 elementaries, the middle school, intermediate school complex, as well as the high school, as well as your outbuildings. So we evaluated the bus garage, we evaluated the field house that's associated with the football field, and as we did that, you're going to see a recurring theme here on these next few slides of things that a BCS would identify. Specifically roofs, There's a lot of roofs within the district that are not only out of warranty, but are even beginning to leak and have caused issues inside the building, causing maintenance nightmares from a ceiling perspective or damage that it can cause inside the building. So door replacements that we identify are typically because the building code changes. So as the building code changes, requirements for fire ratings on those doors change. So although that door may have been good when it was put in 1965, it doesn't necessarily meet the 2015 building code. So that's kind of what we identify. We see doors that don't have labels. We see doors that have wired glass. We see doors that have the old style handles with a knob that doesn't meet ADA. So you'll see that a lot in older buildings is doors don't necessarily take priority. So those are some examples of some of the things. The other things we look at, kind of following along with that ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act, is that's what addresses kind of your handicap accessibility in the buildings. And there are a lot of specifically bathrooms, both individual bathrooms inside of pre-K and K rooms, as well as the toilet rooms that are the larger style toilet rooms, don't meet the current requirements of the ADA. So that's another one of those things that we identify in the BCS. And I think I should backtrack a little bit here and make it clear that these are not things that you are being cited on as a school district. So these, although they are perceived as immediate needs because they meet the needs of your community, they aren't necessarily things, they're things that have been grandfathered. So what SED, what State Education Department says, and that's who issues our building permits and gives us our aid, says that when you do a building project, you have to bring a certain percentage of your non-compliances up to speed. So what they're trying to prevent you from doing is doing a capital project that may involve a lot of nice things that you want to do, but you're not addressing these ADA types of things that still, so they want you to proportionately spend that money. So as you're improving your buildings, you're taking care of these needs. So kitchens and cafeterias throughout the elementary schools were another thing that was identified. If you're familiar with the elementary buildings, the cafeterias function also or attempt to function as their community space that they can meet in after hours. And a lot of those are struggling with space. As a parent at Big Flats, I experienced one of those concerts where you go in and it doesn't necessarily function the way that maybe it did 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So you struggle with being able to fit those capacities. So I think that kitchen and cafeteria, it's both from the perspective that the cafeterias are outdated and are not necessarily the most efficient way that they could be run. But the cafeteria itself is a multifunction space. So it's struggling from both of those perspectives. Some other things that we identified at the elementary schools, asbestos abatement is something that we're doing on a regular basis. Every project that Mike and I have worked together on over the last 5 years, there's another piece of asbestos that we're continuing to get out of the buildings. So that's just, that's every district. That isn't Horseheads school district standalone. Every school district, because asbestos for a long time in the 60s and 70s was a really prominent product. It was a good product at that time. They didn't understand what the problems were. So that's an ongoing thing and just something that we continue to identify in that BCS as we do those walkthroughs. Mechanical upgrades are both from, the headaches that Mike and his crew may deal with on a weekly basis, systems going down, doing maintenance on those systems. So there's that perspective from mechanical upgrades. But there's also a huge savings that a school district can recognize by replacing boilers, for instance, that are old steam boilers that were installed in, again, back in the 60s when the building was originally built. So there's a maintenance side from a school district and a savings from not having to spend so much time and money on maintaining that. But there's also a value to the energy efficiency that comes out of those types of improvements. And that really goes to that next line item as well, the lighting and electrical. There's building codes that have changed, but there's also just efficiencies. There's energy efficiency. There's improvements in products that are out there on the market that can be capitalized on. Technology upgrades. If you're familiar with the district a little bit, you know that we're in phase 1 of our technology improvements. We've actually just starting that project this upcoming summer. So the district has made a huge step forward in improving the infrastructure from a technology standpoint, both here at the high school and at the middle school, intermediate school complex. So this is really just the continuation of that, to expand that out to the elementary schools and kind of complete that process throughout the district. And then playground upgrades. Playgrounds is a place where our children spend time on those playgrounds. Playground codes, again, are constantly being improved and changed to bring up the quality of those playgrounds. So there's always the ability to do that. But then I think there's also, we've identified spaces in the district where there's playgrounds that may not be in the best location on the site. You know, the one that probably jumps out the first to me is probably Ridge Road, that playground that sits right on the corner of Wygant and Ridge Road, right? Yep, Wygant and Ridge Road. So that, you know, those are things that we're looking at, that although that playground may meet the current codes, there's still an addressable item there that maybe that playground could find a new location that's a maybe more safe location. So playgrounds always jump out as things in the BCS to identify. So moving to the middle school, intermediate school campus, again, you're going to see a lot of these recurring themes, but there are different problems as you move up through the buildings. So again, you're going to see roof replacements, you're going to see door replacements associated with fire and safety requirements, you're going to see toilet rooms being improved to meet ADA requirements. So a lot of those things are the same. The middle school, I kind of cruised over this at the elementary school, although it is a problem, parking lots and bus loop versus parent drop-off separation at those elementary schools. None is more recognized than at the middle school, intermediate school campus. You know, that campus, if you've got a student that's gone through that school or have a student that's at that school and choose to not use the busing, you've experienced what can happen at that middle school. And maybe if you don't even have a student, but you live and have to travel Sing Sing Road at 7 in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you will vicariously experience what it is that's happening on that campus. So, you know, that's one of the things that's kind of unique to that campus, the middle school, intermediate school. We perceive it as a function problem, which is why we identified it in the BCS. But you'll see as I get to kind of the notes about the administration and the staff, it was reiterated. You know, so there's clearly a problem with function of flow, vehicle flow at the middle school campus. Again, following through with those BCS concepts, improving the mechanical systems for energy improvement, upgrading the lighting systems, again, for energy improvement, that technology infrastructure. You know, we're taking a large stab at this middle school, intermediate school. We're doing a huge, huge improvement in this building. But anyone that's in the technology industry knows that there is constantly technology being improved upon. So although we will do a large project in the middle school, there's always things to continue to be considering and thinking about. So here at the high school, you know, I'm going to kind of skip over those things that I've been saying all along and kind of go to the crux of what maybe we perceive as the things that can be approved here at the high school. There are the roof replacements, the site facilities. You know, I think one of the things that really struggles here at the high school from a site perspective, besides the parent drop-off and how that functions, but from a physical education, going out to fields as well as athletics, we have a large football field or athletic field that sits out there that is a huge maintenance problem for the staff. And not only is it a maintenance thing that's continually ongoing and ongoing and ongoing, because it's such a highly maintained space for game days or whatever it ends up being, it really limits the use of that field. And you will find a lot of districts going to away from a grass field and providing a field that's a turf field for the purposes of more usability. From a physical education standpoint, when you can take your students out during PE and allow them on that field, even if there happens to be a lacrosse game or a soccer game or a football game. Not to mention, I guess if I were to go there, currently you only play football on that field. So by changing that surface, you've just expanded that field to go be above and beyond just a single sport used on one day of the week. So there's a lot of value to exploring those kinds of options. And then it begins to open up the number of practice fields that even exist within the district, because that even struggles in the district how much green space resides throughout the campuses. Kitchen and cafeteria, you'll notice that I just listed upgrade there. I think that the kitchen and cafeteria, although size-wise, functions very well, I think, within the district. It's clearly the same cafeteria that I went through in 1994, that maybe other people have gone through before me. So it's another one of those things where, is it a space that necessarily needs to be expanded upon? No, but are there better functioning systems out there that don't necessarily push the students through a traditional line? You know, there's a lot of exploration in the surrounding districts where you go to a different system, where the students maybe can get through the line more quickly, and just improve those efficiencies. So, let's see, not to dwell on athletics, but I'm going to go there, and then we're going to get to, because there's another slide here, but you know, currently, if we were to go inside the building and think about physical education inside the building, there is a real disconnect in this building. And I think that speaks to even a bigger problem that occurs within this building, which is the idea of a north and a south. You know, the idea of two buildings here that become really complicated to flow through as a pedestrian. You know, you've got site circulation and then you've got people circulation in this building. And it can be difficult to function inside of this building when, from a PE standpoint, when you may have a class here in the north, and then you've got potentially a class in the south because you've got your gyms separated. Then you've got weight room back over here. You've got bikes off of the cafeteria. So physical education becomes really spread out through the building instead of being in a central location, which becomes really functional in a school building. So there's this idea of bringing physical education to a central location in the building. And then more importantly, if you begin to talk about circulation through the building as pedestrians, creating this idea that it's one building, that it's not two separate buildings with a link, but that it's the high school, it's Horseheads High School, and it's one unified building. And we think that, you know, improving pedestrian traffic through that building can help promote that concept. So that kind of covers the BCS and what we do when we come in and identify a BCS. Now, what we had the opportunity to do as a team is have a number of meetings starting all the way back in January. We started by meeting with administration at each of the buildings. So we went to each of the individual buildings, met with the building principal, got their feedback on kind of how their building functions and how they perceive their building could be better. And then on top of that, we came back and we met with department chairs for each of the grade levels and for each of the individual program here at the high school. So we really tried to dig as deep as we could and touch as many different folks through the district to gather this information. And that's really what you're going to see here on these next slides. So this is, if you remember back to my beginning slide, this is the other half of that BCS. You know, so we do what we can to come in and identify how a building could be better just from a functional standpoint. What we were gathering here was how the program defines how the building could function better. So a lot of this you're going to see is almost kind of a reiteration, but from a program perspective. So the big thing we identified was classrooms undersized, and then also even lacking some classroom space as a general rule throughout the elementary buildings. And I think a lot of that we discovered came from, not a lot of it, but some of it came from new program that the school district is trying to offer to the students. A lot of that, some of that comes from this makerspace. So makerspace is so STEM is an acronym within the educational worlds: science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's one type of program to be able to get the kids to, I think, you know, begin to be more critical thinkers and solve problems rather than just focus on math or technology or engineering or math. Makerspace is, I think, kind of taking that one step further, where you can actually solve a problem and then use this makerspace to build or kind of culminate that problem solving into an actual physical building. So, you know, those spaces, the schools are kind of using classrooms. This program already exists within the district, and they're kind of fitting it into spaces where they can try and make it fit. So I think the message here was, we have a program that we think is really beneficial to the student population, but don't necessarily have the spaces that match that program. The other thing we talked about was kitchens and cafeterias, And that came from both our perspective, just seeing how the spaces were functioning, but then also hearing it from the staff and the administration that they're struggling. Parent drop-off, bus loop drop-off, that separation was obviously a big concern for the administration. Another thing that I thought was really good, that was valuable, I should say there was a lot more notes that I could inundate you with, but these are kind of the big picture items. There was a lot more things that we gathered, but one thing that I thought was really interesting was some of these buildings don't necessarily have even a restroom directly adjacent to that visitor space. You know, so if you're coming to the elementary school to see a concert or see a youth basketball game or whatever it is, not all those buildings have public restrooms directly adjacent to that. So that was a concern that I thought was a good thing to bring up. And then just the general overall aesthetics of the buildings. They are outdated. It only takes one walkthrough of the buildings to see that the buildings are, from just an aesthetic standpoint, are outdated. Moving to the middle school and intermediate school. Here, I think, security was brought up here. It was brought up at every building, but maybe a bigger concern here. Probably mostly stemmed from how students get dropped off and picked up and how that functions and how the security could help improve. Maybe there's an opportunity where improved security systems could help that function more quickly or move students through the spaces more quickly. But certainly an improved security notification system was talked about across the districts, but was more heavily brought up here. Classroom spaces, lacking classroom spaces, updating kitchens and cafeterias, we talked about that. The library at this complex is actually, the feedback we got from them was that it's not a bad library from a space perspective. I think what we really need to look at is how that library is used, how it's broken up. One thing that if you've ever been in that library, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a computer lab that's kind of in the library, but it's not because the walls don't go all the way up. So it seems like the computer lab was intended to be separate from the library, but from a sound perspective, it doesn't really accomplish that at all. So, there's those things where if we had took that whole space of the library and evaluated how it was used and how it was laid out, I think without doing any space reconfiguration, you could just improve the function of that library. So that was one thing they brought up. Again, traffic flow and a space where the entire student body could come together. I think that was kind of almost a recurring theme at all of the buildings, was that they didn't have a space where if they needed to bring the entire student body together, at this campus meaning 5 through 8, if there was a need for that, but there wasn't necessarily a space that could accomplish that. So moving here to the high school, I think the classrooms were probably one of the highest priorities when we began talking about needs here at the high school. Certainly from inside the building, the classrooms were one of the things that was the biggest discussion. The difference between some classrooms, you may go to, for instance, an English room that's one size, and then if you were to go down the hall to another English room, it would be twice the size or half the size. So just some kind of discrepancies of classroom sizes, as well as just an overall general, the program has outgrown the classrooms. And that is not uncommon at all. It's not uncommon for me to work on a project where we are increasing the size of the classrooms. Because the program doesn't match what it used to match. The classrooms don't necessarily want to function. The students don't necessarily want to learn the way that we always did, where you sit in rows and we need to have room for 25 desks, and that's how the classroom is set up. And I think there's still classrooms that function that way, but certainly not all of them the way that they used to. I think that when we sat down, for instance, with the department chair for the science program here at the high school, I think they mentioned there was one science room that they felt like was a really well-sized science room. And we went into it was a biology room, and I couldn't agree more. When we went into that classroom, it was a great setup. They had a lab area where the teacher could take them to a lab with lab desk set up, with water access, gas access if needed, and in the same space, they could break out and they had a teaching space where they had the tables, the desks traditionally set up with a teaching surface. So, I think if you look at that classroom, you almost look at that classroom and say, that's how we need all our science rooms to be. But then when you go to the other end of the building and you go into the earth science rooms, and they're just kind of packed in, and there's just stuff everywhere, and you can see that the program has, in some ways, outgrown the classroom, has outgrown the space. Another topic here at the high school was kind of the location of the main office. You know, when you come to this building as a visitor, unless you've lived in district for 30 years, 40 years, like some of us have, you don't necessarily know where the main entrance is at this building. If your student is, you know, you just move into the district, you assume that it's at the flagpole, but even when you get here, now I think the district did a great job 2 years ago when we did the Secure Entrances project, and we created a way that visitors can come to this building and they can check in at a secure entrance, but they're still disconnected from the main office. You know, if that parent needs to get to the main office, you're still releasing that person into the building. And what you'll see as you look at newer buildings that are being built now, or renovations that are happening, the intention is that a visitor shouldn't need to go into the building. They really shouldn't have a need to go beyond that secure entrance where the main office is, where potentially the nurse is, where the guidance suite is. So basically you have a parent that needs to come to this building. They shouldn't have to figure out whether they're going to the south wing to go to the nurse to pick up their kid, or if they're coming here to check in through a secure entrance to get to the main office. So one thing was just this idea of making these services centralized and bringing them to the exterior of the building for easy access for visitors. Traffic flow, student pickup and drop off. You know, we talk about the middle school a lot, but you know, it's really not much better here. We struggled with Fletcher Street and closing down Fletcher Street and how it used to stack up there, and now people don't stack there. They stack out in front of the, you know, the plaza by the junior parking lot. So I think the idea of creating a safe and secure place where parents can drop off and pick up their students here at the high school was also a focus that was talked about. And then just reiterating that physical education. You know, we identified how the gyms could be improved or the pool could be improved. But this is where we began getting that feedback that having this thing spread out throughout the building wasn't really efficient. And student flow throughout the building. So they all kind of tie together as a piece. So the last thing I want to cover here before we get to the Q&A is kind of what we've done today, what our projected schedule is, and how we kind of land this plane, so to speak. So what we've done, what I've already talked about, is through the month of December, we met with principals, met with some of the administration staff. We had, as Tom mentioned at the beginning of this, we had our first public meeting right before Christmas where we came out and did our first presentation. Then in January, we continued with those meetings. We actually also extended beyond the administration staff and went to the department chairs and did all those meetings. And then we had the staff meeting at the end of January. So originally we had a public meeting set up for end of January. We actually ended up turning that into a working meeting for teachers so that teachers could actually come and individually be able to express their needs and concerns. So we had that at the end of January. Here in February, we kind of wrapped up the department chair meetings and had all of those, and we've landed here today. We're having today's public meeting. We have begun some of the conceptual planning of what a project could look like. We haven't really put anything to paper. Up until now has really been information gathering. That's been our focus, is gathering all the information we can so that we can kind of take it together and begin to put this puzzle together. So going forward, our goal here is to have tonight's meeting, more information gathering, first time for you as a public to be able to come out and speak. We continue with that conceptual design planning and putting that together. Our goal right now, so we have to submit to New York State Education Department whatever our plan is for the project. And the purpose for that is New York State Education Department holds the purse. They hold a portion of the money, a large portion of the money that would be sent to Horseheads to help fund this project. And for them to understand how much money Horseheads School District is entitled to, they need to know what our plan is, whether we plan on putting additions on, what kind of renovations we plan on doing, and a whole bunch of other information. So we're in the process right now of putting that together, gathering that information, which involves enrollments, it involves a whole bunch of other paperwork that's got to be put together. And our goal right now is to be able to submit that to SED, State Education Department, by the end of March or early April. And then when we get to April, we continue that preliminary submission, get that into the state. Our goal right now, and I think we put this out, is to have a public meeting every month to continue to gather information. I think that is worthy of a little bit of clarification. When we submit that plan to New York State Education Department, by no means is that plan set in stone. But it is a starting point for us. And it's really important that we start that clock. Even if that plan isn't set in stone, it at least begins the process of State Education Department knows Horseheads intends to do a project. That's how we're kind of saying, hey, we're going to do a project. Here's what we think we're going to do. And it's time for you to start thinking about how much money the district is entitled to based on this plan. And these things, it's called a preliminary submission for a very good reason. They often change. And SED is very familiar with that. They're very accustomed to it. They understand that that preliminary submission is to begin that clock, but it is by no means set in stone. And there are procedures for us to be able to update that and make tweaks and begin and continue to evolve this. And my point to that is we're going to continue with public meetings. We're going to have this forum once a month where you get to see, this is an information sharing process. We're going to have a new presentation at some point. We're going to have new slides. We're going to show you where we're at. And it's also an opportunity for you to continue to give feedback and talk about the things that you see that are working, or the things that you see that aren't working, or the things that we're just blatantly ignoring, that we shouldn't be ignoring. So that's really the intention of these public meetings. And that, although we're putting that submission in, we're not stopping the information gathering. So, at some point though, that information gathering has to end. And the reason it has to end is because there is a timeline that, as a community, we expect our school board to be able to make educated decisions about what this project should be. And at some point, the school board has to say, yes, we agree this is the appropriate way to spend this money, and we approve this project to be put out to the public for a vote. And that has to happen at some point, because if you don't do that, you don't get to a vote. Right now, we're targeting a public referendum vote sometime between mid to end of October, somewhere in those couple of months. October to December, I think we've always kind of talked about. So to get that, you've got a timeline that's got to go back. You have to be able to go back. There's seeker requirements, which is has to do with environmental quality. It has to do with water and moving water. So there's procedures that have to take place, and they all have clocks associated with them. And so to be able to hit those clocks, to hit that targeted October to December, we begin talking about finalizing the scope and budget. So in May, we continue to have these meetings, and when I say finalize, I think what I'm really talking about is finalize within the team. So finalize within the team that says, this is what we think we should recommend to the school board as your scope and your project. And that presentation happens. We present that to the board, and by the time we get to July and August, that's where we're looking to the school board to say, this is what the project should be, let's put it out to a vote. So that happens in June and July. August is when you see the school board act on seeker. So seeker is State Environmental Quality Review. And basically what they do is whenever you're going to affect over 1 acre of space. So if you're going to affect 1 acre on your site, you have to do this seeker review. And that seeker review really isn't anything more than Hunt puts together the seeker package in conjunction with the school district's attorney, and then that package gets presented to the school board, and the school board will declare themselves the lead agency. And that's a clock that begins and says, okay, now it's time for public comment. And that's when the public basically has the opportunity to come and say, you shouldn't be doing X, Y, or Z because it's impacting whatever it may be. But that project, you have 30 days that has to happen. So that's one of those clocks that, although it seems like we're asking it to be set up soon or making a decision on a scope and a budget soon, It's because of those clocks that lands us at that October to December tentative vote. And that's it. So I think at this point, we're opening it up to the public for questions and answers.
Please don't be shy. Come on.
So, first I'll say you've given us a tremendous amount of information to try to digest in 25 minutes. So, congratulations. Second, I'll say, just touching on some of the things that you brought up. The first is the budget, right? You mentioned that the state holds the majority of the purse for these projects, okay? So the next question as a taxpayer that we have is, how much of the portion are we going to be expected to pony up? Because we live in a state where Chemung County is number 20 in the nation for the tax rate per capita, per medium home value per tax rate, okay? So I'm not sure how much more the community can shoulder, especially when there doesn't appear to be any type of metrics that are going to be used to judge the effectiveness of the changes that you're proposing. Some of them are very clear. You have to replace roofs. You have to meet the ADA Acts, etc. But what metrics are you going to use to show us the return on the investment for changing a doorknob, for making a class bigger, right? Those are things that are very difficult to measure the effectiveness of or the return on the investment for. But as a taxpayer, I want to know that every dollar that we're spending is improving either the efficiency or the effectiveness or et cetera, right? I don't want to just spend it because we think it'll look prettier, right? That's not acceptable to me. I graduated from this school in 1982. It looks almost the same as it did the day I left. So obviously, there's opportunities for changes and improvements, but they need to be gauged for effectiveness and for efficiencies and et cetera. It can't just be feel-good changes. So how will you measure those things and display that information to us?
So, you want me to take it, Tom?
Go ahead first.
So I can start with answering your question about percentages and how percentages of local taxpayer gets paid versus New York State education. So every school district has an aid rate that New York State assigns to them. That aid rate is based on a number of items: free and reduced lunches, there's a number of things. There's a matrix that basically says this school district is entitled to X. Here, currently, it's 80.1. So currently, right now, New York State says for every dollar that this school district spends, 80 cents of it is going to come from New York State. Then the other 20 cents becomes kind of a puzzle for Tom and Katie to figure out. 20 cents, does that 20 cents come from a local share? Does that 20 cents come from other sources of funding? You know, we've got NYSERDA and NYSEG rebates that can help bring sources of funding in. There's, currently we're doing the technology project, which was Smart Schools, which was a whole other source of funding. So the simple answer to your question is, think of it 80-20. It becomes more complicated because there are other sources of funding, and we'll share those as we begin to discover what those are. Those sources of funding get realized when you define what the scope is. So as you do certain types of scope, it opens up doors for other sources of funding. So then that 80% or that 80-20 gets better and better and better, right? So at the end of the day, we'll be able to tell you as we begin to finalize this budget, and it's our intention to be able to tell you to our best projection based on this is the scope, here's all of our other sources of funding besides New York State that money can come in, and here's the bottom line dollar of what we believe per $1,000 of value may or may not impact your tax bill. Ultimately, I think it's everyone's goal to get as close to zero as possible, and that is achievable. I can tell you today that that is achievable to do a project, because I've done it in multiple districts, in different districts, where you end up with a zero impact. And it's because of capitalizing on those other sources of funding. So as this project develops, we intend 100% to show you how we can get to that point. So that kind of answers the first question. The second question on matrix to show you improvements, I think the best way we could do that is probably show you what districts in the area have done recently and how they've made improvements to their classrooms. And then maybe there's a relationship of that improvement of classroom to improvement of grades. You know, that's probably the best way that we could begin to try and gather that information for you. I can tell you that sitting in one of these classrooms, it's when I build a new science room and I see how science rooms have changed from when I was in school or when you were in school, how that function of a science room has changed. It's very easy for me to see a new science room. For instance, we built a STEM room, a science, technology, engineering, and math room up in Watkins Glen over the last maybe 5 years ago. We built one up there. And the way that that space functions is really exciting to see the students come in there and be excited about technology and be excited about engineering and math. It kind of changes the perspective of just sitting in a classroom and learning about algebra. But if you can take and learn how that algebra works together with chemistry, that works together with using a lathe, that works together with welding, you know, it begins to get the kids excited about learning. So I think by beginning to think about those spaces that appropriately match the way the program is changing is really beneficial to the students. I just don't know how we necessarily capture that for you.
Yeah, and the other part of that is, if it's 10 students that are realizing the benefit of that room, it's not economically feasible to put that kind of money into it, right? If it's 50% of your population that's realizing the benefit, great, right? There has to be some level of utilization and some level of return on what you're investing, right? So for 10 students, I don't think that that's necessarily feasible or the best way to spend your money, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it always comes down to money, right? So when you say, oh, zero cost for the tax base, that's great. And then you say, well, 10% of what it's going to be, maybe that's the taxpayer's burden, right? But that's 10% on what we're already paying, right? We're already number 20 in the nation in this county. And I didn't even look at what Horseheads School District is.
Horseheads is the lowest in this county.
In this county, how are we doing nationwide?
I can't compare it nationwide. I have to compare it in the local region. That's what I have.
Okay, so we're lowest in the county. Great.
We're at 1770. The next closest district that's to us is Elmira at around 1980 per thousand. Then you have Elmira Heights at about 2270 per thousand. And just going one county over, we have Corning, which we always get compared against. They're at 2360 per thousand. On some of your comments in regards to taxes, that's one of the things we try to do at the budget season as well, that we've been explaining is very simply that over the past 4 years, because the district has seen wealth in the district go up, not that much, but still go up in an upward trend, our tax rate has actually been coming down 4 of the last 5 years. Like last year, we were saying that our budget would need a 0.05 negative decline in taxes. The actual rate was actually 1.45%. So we're trying to be very conscious of that. And we also have, so that I hit some of the funding sources, as Chad said, we have some state grants, state aid. They're little, but you try to get everything that you can. But we also have debt retiring over the next 6 years that we could possibly incorporate through this, so that we try to say, we're not trying to ask you for more, we're trying to use it within what we have within our budget. Plus the district has about $10 million set aside just for this specific reason, to try to take that burden as much as possible off the local tax base to keep us financially secure. But one of the biggest avenues that I think we've been talking about, and I think people are starting to understand, is if you've seen Corning School, I would ask the question, who paid for Corning School? And a lot of people say, oh, Corning Inc. did. Well, Corning Inc. didn't pay anything for Corning School except in the regular tax bill. The community of Corning paid for part of that, whatever their leftover aid. But the rest came from the state of New York. And Horseheads paid for Corning, just like New York City paid for Corning. The question, if you ask that of any school district, we're always paying for everybody else. And we also feel that trying to do some of this to get the matrix that ultimately come after a couple decades or even a generation of what we do today impacts us in that time. Horseheads needs to also think that sometimes we're going to have to invest to bring the money that we put into the state coffers back to Horseheads as well. I think you owe that to yourself and owe that to the investment that you've made traditionally over 60 years to everybody else to also ask them to support you here at Horseheads. That comes at about an 80% rate. So that's what we're hoping to try to do the best. I caution everybody, I know Chad says that he can get it to zero. I don't want to speculate. We're trying to do the best we can to make the best investment for the board to consider, for the community ultimately to decide.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I just hope that we have some measurements in place, right? Because if you don't measure it, you're not managing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the emphasis that we are trying to figure out. It's hard when you deal with a human component to the matrix when that human component does its return on investment probably a couple decades out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You know, I hate to say this, Chad, but we're all getting older. Do you have any?
Yes.
Okay. Wouldn't have known you because you had a little more facial hair than you had in
And a little less here.
And you were in the high school library when I started here that year. And I have no idea who you are. I have a couple of thoughts. One is, and the first thing that came to mind is, what have we done with the building configuration study that we did a few years ago? Are we going to resurrect that and close buildings or consider closing them? And if we're going to do that, should we not do that before we do this? Having my husband paying taxes in Elmira, I was fascinated to discover some years ago that they renovated all their libraries in their elementary schools and then eliminated their librarians. So they basically closed them after they renovated them. I do not wish to see Horseheads decide that after we've done all this, oh, but now we have to close the building. So keep that in mind as you plan for this. I don't think, frankly, I'm not a taxpayer person in terms of getting excited about it, but I don't think the taxpayers will like that if you do this now and 3 years from now you decide to close Center Street. So that has to come into this, because I can't believe you haven't gotten my question before. Okay, and these basically right now are just thoughts, because it's the first time I've heard this. Every time I drive past the intermediate middle school, I think to myself, geez, there was just a traffic light here and a turn lane. There's enough land to put one in. And if you put a fairly long turn lane in and a traffic light, we might be able to make a big difference in that morning and evening traffic. And then if you want to turn it off at 8 o'clock at night and let it blink yellow, that's fine. But I think that is certainly a logical thing to look at, okay? And maybe even the county would pay for some of that possibility. The surface of the football field, I'm a football fan, and I've spent a lot of time listening in the last number of years to complaints about the artificial turf that goes down in pro football stadiums, that they're not safe, there's more injuries. My question is, there's some things called fake grass now, which seems to be safer, but if we're going to replace natural turf with an artificial turf, it can't be at the expense of knee injuries and things like that, both for phys ed and for sports. So just that's a comment. The intermediate middle school library is a monstrosity that came in a day when everybody thought everything had to be open. And I remember when I first came here in 1981, I looked at that library and I said, oh my goodness. But there was only, they somehow, for whatever the reason, they survived with it. The sound is probably the biggest thing. I think the sound bothers us as teachers more than it bothers kids. That's what I've concluded. And that in part because when I first came to Horseheads, the library had no classrooms in it. It had tables in the center, bookshelves all the way around the outside, and there were no classrooms. And when we added the classroom on one side and got rid of shelves, kids didn't seem to be bothered by the noise at all. So we added another one on the other side, and that didn't seem to bother anybody either. So then when we were really busy, we added a class in the center of the library, and the kids looked at the schedule on the wall and said, 3 classes, I'll go someplace else today, there's no room for me. But the sound itself didn't seem to bother the kids. So I would just make that as a statement as to the fact that maybe that's not the highest priority. There are ways to work around that. The biggest loss was when they took the conference room that was there where they put all that exhaust for the science rooms. They took a good, nice conference room that was a nice classroom for certain purposes, and they put all this other stuff in it and wiped it out as far as the library was concerned. That was a real loss for the library at the time. It was private, it was quiet, you know, it allowed teaching at times. And the other thing I wanted to comment on is, this is the Jack Kent statement. The link was supposed to be a straight line between 2 buildings, and it ended up with a hook in it, the back leg of a whatever. And if you were going to make any more links, they need to be a straight line from there to there, because again, you're dealing with supervision of high school kids. And I don't know how that link ever got there, but Jack never let us forget that one all the years he was here. And the last comment I have is, if you're going to locate the main offices, back when we first started looking at block scheduling, we talked long and hard about how we could change the building. And I don't have all my block scheduling stuff anymore. But one of our wish lists was to put the administrators and the guidance people off the link, so that the backside of the link became the main entrance into the building for those purposes. Then the current guidance office became a large classroom that phys ed could use for activities where they wanted kids to sit down and they wanted to explain whatever was going on. They had the Fitness for Life, all that kind of thing. So they had a classroom available close to the phys ed department. Ideally, phys ed in one place, yeah. Unless you want to tear down the building and start over, it's probably not happening. So, you know, people are going to look at that and say, well, you could close off the other side. We talked about that. But then you have this opening in the center, and you don't have necessarily access to get out of there in a timely fashion if you've got 500 students on one side of that building. So I don't know enough about it to know if that works or not. I will tell you that in the late 90s, we talked a lot about configuration of the building. And we finally spent a lot of time trying to put departments in one place together so they could talk to each other. And I think we did a pretty good job of it. So I don't know what else I can say right now. But I am very concerned about the configuration and the existence of all buildings before we rent it. Okay? By the way, I'm Carolyn.
Carolyn, just real quick, just to answer you on the consolidation study.
Yes.
The Board of Education acted on that it's almost about the beginning of last year. The beginning of this year, the end of last year. And they put it to rest. There was 3 options. And those 3 options, one was, if I remember, pink, orange, and green.
I never felt, in listening to that and reading it, I never felt that it had been put to rest in the minds of a lot of people.
The board actually took an official vote and closed it. They opted to move forward and address the district, not close schools at this time.
But I just never felt that was necessarily a final.
But that was theirs, so that's done and over with.
Okay.
Okay.
actually came to the attention, this project came to my attention when I was talking about how I felt like I could help in the educational aspect of this. So, especially in what you were talking about in terms of STEM sciences. So, the first question is, at one point in this plan, the schedule that you showed us earlier, are we going to have this talked about or this integrated? Because as a senior, I'm going to Corning this fall, and I would like to know when or if my help is really needed on this project as a student, like offer suggestions or to lead input on the STEM aspects. So my question to me.
So, okay, go ahead.
I would say when and in what ways would I help?
So right now, so the first answer to your question, schedule-wise, what we're looking at right now is if we hit that target of October, somewhere between October and December of a vote from the public, is hitting the ground running and basically putting those plans together and looking at potentially some construction as early as next summer, and then obviously rolling into the following upcoming 2 or 3 years. So that's really what we're looking at in terms of kind of a broad stroke of a schedule for construction. From a perspective of, go ahead, Tom. In terms of students, we've actually just recently scheduled a meeting where we're going to student council. Student advisory. So we're going to come in and actually do a presentation and get feedback from students through a student advisory. So that's going to be a really good opportunity for students to come and give that input and be able to share with us what they think could help. So that's one way we're doing it.
And Chad, your name, it wouldn't be Dylan, is it?
Yes.
Yes, I think it's Dylan Green. Dylan, I know your application is on the education side, and I will tell you, Mr. Gill, as well as I think President Stroll and a couple others on our planning team are putting together that team right now, and I know they saw your application, so they're working on that. I think within the next day or two, you'll probably be hearing something. And what Dylan's asking about is, we have not only the capital side, but we have the educational side of what's going on inside Horseheads for the future of our student body. That's sort of that investment piece that we were talking about. We're trying to bring individuals from parents, business, community leaders, elected officials, our HTA, our collective bargaining agreements to the table to say, how do we make Horseheads even stronger than it already is going forward? And that, I know Dylan's very interested in it, but that's what he's talking about. And we collected all kinds of applications throughout the district. We had numerous applications that came in, and that committee is being selected. But right now, before we can announce it, we want to contact everyone because that committee is about to hit the ground running within the next 30 days. So thank you for the interest as well.
I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other students go through the interior design classes, even some of the local classes, even some just
Sure.
the other venues.
And that's one of the things, like currently Dylan, to feedback, it's not, we want to learn also from the community, but we also right now are out trying to learn from the students that have gone through the system. What do they feel that Horseheads has prepared them for? What do they feel that they think they may be missing? What are some of the things they also aspire to be? So I'm meeting with seniors right now because they've gone through the whole system. But in addition, I know Ms. Donahue is working with her Student Leadership Task Force to help coordinate the activity across the entire school so that the students start participating in the leadership of this activity. In addition, we've asked our English teachers to also take some time to ask for 5 to 10 minutes to write some of their thoughts and feelings, some of their frustrations as well, so that we can provide all these different data points to the architect to work. And all of that gets communicated on as well, as much as possible, to the Board of Education as we develop some of the conceptual plans and trying to address primarily the education component. We have to do the capital, but we have to look at how do we build the education that's stronger for Horseheads and have the capital that supports that needed education. So that's really, I think, what Dylan's really reacting to, because he's talked to me 4 or 5 times, and I appreciate it, because he's really interested. He's even committing that he would like to be part of it when he goes beyond here and we continue this year. And I think that's a true testament to what we get from our student body as well as our community. Other questions or any, we also want to know, you're in the community, you've been here, you've gone through it like you have. Is there something you see that we should be looking at? Like one of the concepts that I talked about is we live in a major glass industry area, but yet most of our high schools don't necessarily teach anything around engineering and glass. And we do have a university right down the road that teaches it. But schools become feeder programs. Is that something that the community would like to see? Is that something the students would like to see? Is that something businesses would like to see? We also have a heavy machining and manufacturing component to our area. How do we build that into the community? We want to know from you, what do you want from your school? So. Okay.
Hello, my name's Jared Zembeck. I'm a phys ed teacher here. There's not many here, but there seems to be a lot of slides about it. And I'm also the aquatics director here. And I just kind of wanted to voice my, just be a voice for both our phys ed programs, which really we've kind of lost a lot, but we're starting to get it back. It's, we're just, on Monday we start our 4th grade swimming, where we're actually bringing the elementary kids, 4th graders, back to the pool to give them lessons and teach them more advanced skills as well. I just think we do so much in the pool that I just wanted to get up and just say a couple of things that, as somebody that's worked here for almost 20 years, I would love to see things like an area to teach our CPR classes, because at this point, I usually have to go bug a couple people to find a classroom to teach it in, and sometimes I have a large group. And we teach great things like lifeguarding and other things, and our pool is used from 5:30 to 9 o'clock pretty much every single night and during the weekends, and I just, I just wanted to come up and just say a couple of things. I know there's been talk about the pool, and I'm just kind of curious of where that's going, for both phys ed and our swim teams and our community members and everything like that. I know this might not be the greatest forum for that because there's no plans really drawn up at this point, but I just wanted to kind of come up and also ask, when we create the facilities, specifically athletic, physical education facilities, I'd like if the phys ed teachers, me being the aquatic director, and other coaches be somewhat involved in some capacity in, certainly not the architecture, just that piece of it obviously, but just things that we've been to. I've been to hundreds of pools, and I've seen things that were done right, and I've seen things that were done wrong, and it's always a constant comment by a coach or another teacher, like we weren't really involved in that decision. And I hope that we can be involved in this decision, because like I said, we've been to a lot of facilities, and I've seen great things, and I've seen a lot of shortcuts and things that have gone wrong, like up at our field house, the track. It's okay until you get to one corner, then it sort of becomes that link we were talking about. And like I said, I just wanted to just kind of voice my opinions on some of the great things we can do by possibly getting more elementary schools here to come in and utilize the pool. But our pool is pretty old. It's seen its day, and it's extremely inefficient, stuff like that. And for as much as we use it, I couldn't just sit down. I wanted to come up and just say we would be very happy to volunteer our time, because it is us working in those places, and I just like to be involved, and I'm sure a lot of the other teachers and every department would like to be able to give suggestions of what they've seen work.
So let me talk a little bit about the process and where we're at today. You're the swim director here. I think I can speak for Mike and Tony and Tom and say, we wouldn't do a pool project if we didn't hear from you. Okay, so that's the first message. I think the really important thing to understand is right now, and this is hard to kind of wrap your mind around sometimes, but you know, I maybe equated to an addition on your house or a renovation you're going to do to your house. Right now, we're kind of in that stage of, do we need a new living room, right? We don't necessarily know what that living room might look like or what the shades are that we're going to hang in that living room. But what we need to do as a community, as a team, and as a board is say, we need a better pool. We need to improve this pool, and we know there's a list of things that staff that use that pool every day and go to meets outside of the district, they know those things. So what we're kind of building to today right now is, as a collaborative, we're trying to say, for this case, we need to improve the pool. And then what we're doing is we're saying to the community, we need to improve the pool, and here's X, Y, and Z of why we need to improve it. Not necessarily that we're getting into the nuances of how that improvement happens. And then ultimately, our goal is if we pass a project as a collaborative, as a community, as a board, that those meetings, I mean, that's really why I'm saying construction is so far out, right? Because when we pass a vote in October, by no means is anything set other than the big picture that says we need to improve the pool, for instance. And then there's a series of meetings that have to occur with you and your colleagues and other people that use that pool. Maybe even, in some cases, I did a pool renovation in another district where we actually brought in members from the community because there's so much activity that happens specifically in a pool from outside agencies as well. So as much as we wouldn't want to let an outside agency dictate how that pool landed, all that information is important and important to gather. So that process, although it doesn't feel like it's happening now, and maybe it should be happening now or could be, we kind of hesitate to do that really in-depth planning before we make a decision that a pool should be part of the project. So trust me when I say that if a pool is part of the project, your information and your colleagues' information is going to be vital to making sure that that pool is right at the end of the project.
Great. Thank you, I appreciate it.
And Jared, as you take a seat, just so that you know, we've met with administrators, we've met with department chairs, faculties. We're currently in the process of starting to set up 3 meetings, one with fall season, one with winter season, and one with spring season coaches. Because we're not leaving you out, it's just we've got to go through a process and go through. Just like we have to figure out a way to address some of our extracurricular programs that haven't been able to talk about what are potential needs as it relates to the BCS for moving forward.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Other thoughts or questions, or even if the board has a question, I mean, feel free. It's your meeting.
So thank you again to everyone who came out this evening. As you saw from Chad's presentation, it is a process, and it's a process over a long period of time. It's one of the most important projects that we'll ever undertake and consider as a community. So making sure that we get input from the residents, from the current students, from the current parents, from the current staff, from parents that residents that may not yet have children, parents of non-school age children, senior citizens, all facets of the community. You'll see with the Horseheads 2030 team on the educational side that's going to be put in place. We've gone through all the applications that have been submitted and made sure that all of those groups from across our community are represented to be involved in the process. So I would encourage you to stay involved, keep coming to the meetings. You can always call the district office if you have a thought or an idea that you weren't able to express this evening or aren't able to come to another meeting. Encourage your friends and colleagues to come out because we really truly are interested in hearing what people have to say. As you all know, more minds is better than a single one. So through working together and getting everyone's input, we'll be able to come up with the best possible proposal for our community. So thank you again for coming, and please stay engaged.
As we have a formality that we'll have to go to close the meeting. But again, we'll be around if you have some questions. Sometimes people are camera shy. Please pay attention to our website. We try to video each night so that honestly, on behalf of the board, we're trying to make this as open, as transparent a process as possible. Although it's a process that goes forward, without you, we can't make it even be as inclusive as possible. I would ask you, please pay attention to the dates that we have. Please, if everybody can bring 2 more people each time, our big thing is, on behalf of the board and the district, is to include everybody and at least have that discussion. So thank you all. Again, we'll send out reminders in the future. I want to thank Hunt Architecture. I want to thank Welliver McGuire, but Welliver, our construction manager here, as well as everybody that was able to come out. So if the board would like to entertain a motion.
We need a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Thank you, everybody.